With Jupiter's Legacy getting its own Netflix show in the coming months, I thought I'd go back and read Mark Millar's original 5-issue series and ask one question. Is this worth reading? Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Jupiter's Legacy was a 5-issue miniseries that was written by Mark Millar, which I've now been told isn't pronounced Mark Millar, and illustrated by Frank Quitely, and this was the first time in a number of years that he'd done the art for someone other than Grant Morrison. It was published by Image Comics under the Millarworld banner, and this had quite a hectic release schedule despite the fact that it was only 5 issues. The first issue was released in April 2013, with the 5th not being released until nearly 2 years later in January of 2015. Netflix acquired the rights to do an adaptation of the series, which is due to be released in May of this year. And yeah, admittedly, I am hoping that this video can leech off the success of that series, even if admittedly, that plan kind of backfired with my Umbrella Academy review. But although this did get a sequel series and even a prequel in Jupiter's Circle, today I am only going to be judging the first 5-issue miniseries. This is my TLDW, it's a part of the video for people who don't have time to watch the full thing, but you still want to know if this book might be for you. And all that I can really say about Jupiter's Legacy is that what at first appeared as some kind of gimmicky crossover between the Justice League and Keeping Up with the Kardashians, then eventually evolved into one of the most interesting, enjoyable, and thought-provoking superhero stories that I've read in recent memory. And if that's all the review that you needed, thank you for tuning in. Remember to click the thumbs up down below and subscribe if you're new here, and click that bell notification so that you never miss a video. But for everybody else, let's take a look at the plot. In 1932, a group of explorers are searching for an island that their leader Sheldon Sampson saw in a dream. Accompanied by his brother Walter, his fiancée Grace, and a few others, they find the island and they become the world's first superheroes. We then jump to now, and by now I mean 2013. The relationship between Sampson and Walter has crumbled, and this is due to the fact that the former believes that they should be using their superpowers to save the world when necessary, and the latter feeling that they should be using their powers and status to take a more proactive approach to global crises. Yeah, I'm not sure I said that word correctly. This debate then trickles down to the next generation, Chloe and Brandon, who are the children of Sampson and Grace. But like most children of celebrities, their lives are a farce, completely disconnected from the real world, and they are just so caught up in the rockstar lifestyles that they've been leading, complete with groupies and overdoses. But when the conflict finally reaches a boiling point, how will the sins of the father affect the rest of his bloodline? What happens when superhuman beings are given more power than just that of their abilities? And if superheroes, or worse, supervillains, were ever to control the world, what would that mean for everyone else? The art, well, it's Frank Quitely, so of course it's beautiful, but I don't feel like he was used to his full potential here. That's not to say that the art's bad, but when I compare it to stuff like WE3, JLA Earth 2, and even All-Star Superman, it doesn't really reach the same heights as that. There are a few fights in this, but due to the plot, it is quite dialogue heavy. And by this time we knew what Frank Quitely could do, we knew what he brought to the table, but I just never felt like we really got to see his full range. The design of the Utopian also reminded me quite a bit of the Supreme. I'm not sure if I'm alone in this one. And throughout this story, there was so many superheroes in this that I don't feel like a lot of them had particularly memorable costumes. As well, Chloe, especially in those later issues, looked very much like the actress in 10 Things I Hate About You, apparently. I've never seen that chick flick or cried at it. But then as soon as I noticed that similarity, I also noticed that a lot of the other faces tended to look alike, and it's kind of similar to how I felt with Steve Dillon's style when I was reading the Punisher run. However, one thing that I did really like in this story was how Frank Quitely drew powers, especially Walter's, because obviously he can mess around with dimensions and stuff like that, which they could have just done in a clean-cut way, but they actually decided to use that a little bit further. The panel actually translated to how he was using it, and I just wish that we could have seen that more often. And obviously, some credit does have to go to like the colorist and other people that were involved in it, but that was just something that I really liked. The scenery was also beautiful. I loved the original island that they were looking for in 1932, and Quitely also has a great way of just capturing a certain time frame, so you feel like you're there during that period, even if you're only there for a few pages. But there were a handful of occasions where I noticed a lack of detail, and I'm not too sure if this can be blamed on the release of the series and because of the fact that there were such ample delays between issues. But besides the character in the foreground, often the one that would be talking, I just noticed that there was a lot of empty space behind them. This is a guy that did All-Star Superman, and although I feel like Quitely does have a good grasp on the space where his characters are, I also feel like he knows exactly when to use detail, but there were just so many occasions where there was just nothing else there. But by no means am I saying that the art's bad, especially when you see people using the powers like in one of the later issues, there was somebody that could grow exponentially in size, and he just had a great sense of scale. And I like the way that Quietly could convey expression, so there would be scenes where people were just in the shower and you knew their emotions without it being that Silver Age of storytelling where they'd have to monologue what they were feeling. He was great at showing you the human that you should be focusing on, so even though I'm nitpicking about stuff like the backgrounds looking a bit bare, it still managed to do the main thing that it needed to do. And I think his style created a great tone for the series overall, because it had this classic look to it with those clean, crisp lines, but it also had those subtle details that a more contemporary style would have. And that managed to balance one of the key themes about the contrast between the parents and the children. So if the art was to get a rating alone, which is something that I'm going to try including in future reviews, so let me know if you like it, this would get 3 out of 5 bones. I had a great time with this book. Like, I mean a really fucking great time with this book. No, like, seriously, okay, you get the point, but this might be my most enjoyable read of this year so far. It's the first time in a while that I went into a book knowing nothing, and I was surprised by just how much I enjoyed it. Like, I haven't even watched the trailer for the Netflix show just yet because I wanted to go into this completely blind. I was expecting something that had that standard juvenile type of humour that I've come to expect from Mark Millar, because the main story that I know from him is probably something like Kick-Ass. And in the first few issues, I felt like that was the way that it was going, because I thought that it was just okay, but felt like the politics of the story and the meaning behind it was just being slapped around my head a bit too much. But as it got into those later issues and it began to tell a story with its message rather than telling us a message and then having the story as an afterthought, that's when this book really began for me. Minor nitpick, but I feel like in stories like this it's a bit of a misstep when you include a politician that is of the time, because Obama is referenced in this, but because of that I feel like it's already a little bit dated, even though the message behind it is still quite relevant. In hindsight though, I'm glad that this book came out when it did, because if it had come out during the time of Trump, and I always try my best on this channel to avoid being political because I think that's an opinion of mine that should remain private, then this book probably would have been seen in a different light and the message probably would have felt a bit more on the nose. Because that central question about whether we give celebrities too much power and if they already have too much influence on the public as it is was so fascinating, and I feel like if it would have come out today rather than the 8 or so years ago when it first debuted, I feel like that would be seen more as like a direct political attack rather than just being the plot of the book. Pacing also had a weird issue for me, because we start in 1932 and we see Sheldon and his team searching for this island, and then you skip to the modern day of 2013 and you're left wondering what's happened, but you can piece it together by pretty much seeing the fact that they went to this island and now they're superheroes. Like, it doesn't really take too much thinking to gather together that they probably got powers on that island, so I didn't really care too much. It didn't disrupt the rest of the story, but by the time that we go back to that storyline in 1932, it's already been too much time away from it. I kind of assumed what happened on that island. I didn't really need to go back, especially at a point where the story was already running with speed. The action, even though it wasn't the focus of the story, which I found to be quite unusual considering that when you get these superhero stories you do expect it to be mainly about these big spectacle fights, even though those fights weren't the focus of it, I still found them pretty enjoyable. And even though I've already touched on some of the issues that I did have with the art and the fact that I didn't think there was too much variety of it, I still did like the pace that was here. Considering that there's only 5 issues, you get introduced into a very vivid world. You get the sense that there's so much going on throughout this world that you're just only getting a piece of that pie. And what I was really surprised with was how it managed to change my opinions on certain characters as the book continued on. In particular, I'm speaking about Chloe, because I did not like her in those first couple of issues. I felt like she was vapid, self-centered, and I just couldn't really get behind her. But then as the story continued on, I ended up finding her to be one of the most interesting characters, and I wanted to see more of her throughout this first part. Because that's what's best about these type of stories, and what I find most enjoyable is the fact that they can do more. It's similar to the reason that Invincible is one of my favourite comics of all time, because of the fact that it isn't constrained by the pressure of all the editorial issues of any of the big 2 publishers. So Mark Millar can get away with doing more in this. It genuinely feels like this is what he wanted his version of Civil War to actually be. And it's interesting the themes that you can see in that Marvel book when you compare it to Jupiter's Legacy. And because of this being creator-owned, there are some genuine shocks in this story. I'm not going to touch on them here, we've got a spoiler section for that. And it tells a story that most other superhero comics aren't able to do, and if they did, you know they wouldn't really have much weight to it. It's in a similar way to Age of Apocalypse, and I know that this might sound like one of my usual tangents, but just bear with me here. Age of Apocalypse to me is just an event. I know that it happened for a brief amount of time where they completely changed all the X-Men titles, and people were told that this was it. But sure enough, with the benefit of hindsight, I know that that wasn't it. Within about a year, it ended up changing itself back to the way that it was, but with these creator-owned titles, you know that that's not going to happen. The ramifications of actions are permanent, and I like that we got this throughout this book into a much more severe worldwide level. I'm sorry if I seem a bit frantic and that I'm waffling on, it's just that I enjoyed this title so much and I just really wasn't expecting to. And the best thing I can say about Jupiter's Legacy is something that I don't tend to say about a lot of books, but I genuinely wanted this to be longer. Before you comment, I know there's a sequel series, I know there's a prequel, but what I mean is that the story that we got within these 5 issues, I actually felt could have been expanded. I wanted more time in certain situations, I wanted to see the reactions of other characters, I wanted to see the impact on the world that certain decisions had. Hopefully that makes sense, but I don't think I can elaborate too much more on this without jumping into spoilers. This is your final spoiler warning. If you don't want anything ruined for this book, I'd recommend skipping to the final verdict that will be in the timestamp down below. But to pick up where we left off, when I said that I wish this book could have been longer, what I mean is that I wish we got more time between 2013 and 2022. There was so much time skipping throughout this book that I felt like they missed a lot of storytelling potential there that I really want them to go back to and expand on. That's a significant amount of time, and where we left we saw that Walter was rising to power, and then all of a sudden we jump and it's some kind of dystopian universe. Kind of like a lot of zombie titles, they never actually show you how stuff breaks down to that point, and I wish that they would have done it here. Don't get me wrong, it's jarring and it's cool when all of a sudden we're in issue 4 and we're in a completely different scenario to what we thought we would be in, because those last 2 issues were like the good part of Heroes Season 3, and if it would have been that over the 5 issues, it then leaves on a cliffhanger that we're building up to this 2022, which is even worse than what we've seen in 2013. There is absolutely no way that I would have been able to have a break between books 1 and books 2. Honestly, I don't know how anybody read this in single issues, that wait would have been excruciating. But because of that, there's also the problem that it doesn't feel like you get a complete story in these 5 issues, so when we get into that second part, I don't know why it renumbers at issue 1, it should have just continued with issue 6, and then I would have just been able to comfortably read it right now. But what really highlighted that problem for me was Barnabas, because I felt like he was a great character that we just got absolutely no time with. Like, why not leave him till the second book? Because we already had Walter, and we had Brandon, and we knew that they were the kind of villains of this, so then we're introduced to this new villain, but only for 1 issue and only for a brief amount of time. They could have saved him until the second part, made him the main villain of that, similar to the Star Wars structure of things, and then it would have allowed us to get a bit more breathing time in this dystopian future and really see just how bad it is. This didn't derail the story for me, and I don't think it should put anybody off reading it, but what I mean is that I'm used to always saying that books could have been shorter. You've probably seen that if you've watched any of my other reviews before, so this is the first exception, but I felt like the pace here was going so frantically that we actually missed out on some good storytelling. Holy fuck though, I couldn't believe that they did that to the Utopian. This is like if the Justice League got together to kill Superman. It just feels like something that shouldn't be conceivable. Like, this is what I was saying about why creator-owned comics are great, because I am so conditioned to the main hero of a book, the like Superman-like character, to always just get out of any situation and be safe, that I didn't actually register that he had been properly killed. He's gone. I kept saying to myself like, oh, this character can time travel, oh, this character can probably pull people through space, oh, they might have a clone, oh, it might not actually be him to begin with, but then I was like, wait, no, this is a creator-owned series, that character is dead. And in a weird way, it was nice to have that. It was nice to have genuine stakes. It reminded me of why I read titles like this to begin with. I don't really think I've had that feeling that near enough any hero can die at any time since I've read Invincible. And as well, for the first 2 issues, even though we only spent a limited amount of time with them, you could really feel the tension between Walter and Sheldon. It made me wish that they hadn't killed the Utopian so early so that we could have seen more of him, especially as Walter's trying to enact this plan, and we could just see his reaction throughout it, because that one scene that I really liked is when Walter was actually in the White House when he was talking to people, and you see the Utopian learn about it, and he just goes there and he asks them for a word and they step outside, and to be fair, that was a more tense scene than some of the fights in this book. You could also kind of understand where each of them was coming from. The Utopian understood that it wasn't really their place to be saying what exactly should be done with politics, but then you also had Walter who thought that if they were able to do some good in that regards, isn't that more important than just saving a cat out of a tree? Before it all really kicked off, I found myself wondering, where exactly do I stand in that debate? And this is what I'm saying, that I wish they could have given us a bit more time to mull that over, rather than killing the Utopian and then just going, yeah, this is the world that you've got now, it's all turned to shit. But like I said, I still did enjoy what we got, so not really holding it against it. It's just one of those things that I think my own theories and what I was thinking as I was reading it kind of outweighed what actually happened. I don't have great feelings for Brandon, but I think that's the point, so I do think it succeeded in what it was doing, and I liked how much that contrasted with his sister. Chloe really did a 180 50-50 on what I thought of it, and Hutch did the same as well. At first I didn't like her because I thought she was spoiled, bratty and obnoxious, but I liked that when the world turned to shit, she somehow managed to build the family that she wanted for herself, that I feel like maybe she thought she had lost with her own dad. So she went from being miserable, having all the fame and riches, but then she ended up in a dead-end job with her family and she seemed somewhat content. There was so much that I love about this book that there's probably something that I'm forgetting, but I don't want this review to go on for about 3 hours. Damn, I didn't think I'd ever be saying this, but thank you, Netflix. If it wasn't for you making a shot at this book, I don't think Jupiter's Legacy would have ever been on my radar. This came out during that time where there were so many Millarworld titles that it didn't feel like it was easy to distinguish one from the other or see which one stood on its own 2 feet and had its own identity. Without even reading the likes of Nemesis, Superiors, Starlight, or any of the countless kick-ass sequels, prequels, or spin-offs, I can genuinely say that Jupiter's Legacy is probably the biggest victim of my ignorance. Although it takes a few issues to really find its stride, this series did more for me than most superhero titles from the big 2 publishers that I've read in recent years. I have to reiterate this, but this is the only book that I've read where I wanted them to slow down the pace so that I could enjoy the world that they've created even more. However, if like me you're reading this as a standalone book, irrespective of the sequel and the prequel, you may feel that you don't get a full beginning, middle and end. There's still enough going on here that's enjoyable. Throughout multiple videos in the past, I've made the joke what happened to Mark Millar because we don't see his name as much as we did in the early 2000s, but if during that entire time he's just been doing his own thing and creating great books like this, then I can accept that as a valid excuse. I think this is a great series for any modern reader, especially if you're looking for a superhero story that looks at how we can end up celebrity worshipping those that we're supposed to trust and how we can often confuse popularity as some kind of political aptitude. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I'm not the smartest person in the world, I don't pick up on a lot of subtext, and I'm not saying that Mark Millar is any kind of like creative genius, some kind of Shakespearean storyteller or anything like that, but I still really enjoyed what was going on beneath the surface of this book. It's along the lines of Ex Machina, but I think that this manages to also balance in Millar's sense of satire while still not taking away from the core of the book. But regardless of what Netflix has in mind for this series, I'm glad that I read Jupiter's Legacy. I'm excited to see what's waiting in the sequel series that's coming up, and I can easily recommend this to anybody that's looking for a modern day superhero story with a little bit of a twist. So it's going to get a very generous 75%. Woof woof. So that was my review. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you've read Jupiter's Legacy, let me know what you think of it down below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't, why did you get this far? Subscribe if you're new here. We are so close to 2,000 subscribers that I can't really believe it at the moment, and we've also got a live stream coming up this Friday, which I hope to see you all there for. Check out my social media links down below along with our own Reddit page, and also I've got a tip jar if you do want to support the channel. Check out some of my other videos, but until next time, just make sure that you stay safe, stay reading the best books that you can find, and stay mad all you dogs. Woof woof! See you at the next video.